My name is Kevin Carroll. I'm the Executive Director of Tech San Diego. We're a trade association set up to keep the innovation economy more competitive. One of the things that always comes up is cybersecurity for all companies, not just innovation companies, but innovation companies seem to get have more incidents than some other companies. And the impetus for this event was I was getting an abnormal amount of emails on cybersecurity events. And I was looking at them, and invariably every single one of them looks like it was a single kind of vendor-driven buy my special virus protection package and everything will be okay. And I was getting 1 to 2 of those a day. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could gather a bunch of people, talk about all the different aspects of a cyber incident? Yes, it does include protecting your network and other things, but it also includes, insurance. What are best practices? What's going on in that space? Legal and liability. And then from an IT, a better perspective. So I went out to some of the smartest people I knew. We got this group together, and that's what this event is. It's meant to give you a very broad overview, and our goal is that you can there is takeaway value. So when we're finished with this, there's going to be things that you can immediately take back to the office, like we're meeting in person, that you could walk down the steps or call somebody at the office, and we'll go ahead and do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce the moderator very briefly, and I'm going to let him kind of take over. I'm going to kind of slink into the back and go off camera. If you want to know more about Tech San Diego, go to techsd.org. You can ask any questions through the chat function. If anybody has any problems on IT problems, I was going to say one of our folks here could fix it, but we have Sarah Spiva, who's our communication director, who's also in the background taking care of things. If you're not on the panel and you're on the screen, you shouldn't be. So go ahead. You can go ahead and take yourself off camera, and Sarah will take you to the other room, and we'll get going. So again, I'm going to introduce the moderator for that, and that's Chris Eakin. Chris, wave your hands so people know who you are. Chris co-founded Infracore in July of 2003. As CTO, his focus is heading up their CIO consulting practice. Chris enjoys transforming clients' IT departments by helping them build and change the way IT is implemented and managed. He aims to ensure that they have a genuine difference by building trust, leveraging IT to improve operations, having the right vision, starting conversations, and empowering the right people to do what is needed. Chris grew up, his entire family was technical. So he grew up I think he's aging himself a little bit, but in his bio, he says that he grew up in the early days of IT. So I don't know if that's the 50s or 60s. You're going to have to elaborate on this, but this provided him with an understanding and confidence in technology that most people didn't have at his age. It helped him land his first IT job when he was 19, providing technical support on a Unix-based platform. Throughout his career, Chris worked for a variety of companies, from mid-sized companies to startups. He also worked for a venture capital firm, and that really was his inspiration they were giving away money to all kinds of people, and I think he probably figured they should probably give money to me. So he started Infracore then. So Chris, I'm going to go off camera, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hey, thank you, Kevin. So to expand on what Kevin said, I want to thank you, TechSD, for having a great idea, a great topic. I'll echo what Kevin said. I think we get a tremendous amount of cybersecurity pieces that cross our inbox all the time. And what the goal was of this conversation today was pull in some of the experts in the field. We've assembled a great panel, really excited to walk through everyone's bio here in a moment. The goal today is to have this be an open conversation, no selling whatsoever. And we really kind of talk about what you really should know or really pay attention to pre-breach, during the breach, and after breach. And even calling it a breach is something we'll talk about. So let me run through the panelists. Let me start with Matthew Strebe. So Matthew provides expert witness testimony for cyber incident cases such as Anthem, Primera, Experian, Facebook, Google, Equifax, Morgan Stanley, Eddie Bauer, Arby's, and a few others. Some companies there you may or may not have heard of. In his spare time, Matt is also the CEO of Connetic, a San Diego-based MSP that services a number of companies nationwide. He's also the CEO and founder of CENRG, a secure private cloud hosting platform, the co-founder and managing partner in QuickNist, a compliance management software as a service company, as well as serves on the board of advisors for 2 cybersecurity startups and is developing Monisent, if I'm saying that correct, an automated data breach detection and alerting system based on anomalous event detection. In addition to that, Matt also provides consulting advice for source code developers in cryptography, secure network protocols, Internet of Things, and cybersecurity devices. Needless to say, he's probably not the guy you want to have in your Friday poker game to try to beat him on playing poker. Let me introduce Tim O'Brien. Tim is the Director of Privacy and Security at Marsh and McClennan Agency. In previous roles, Tim has served as the CIO, IT Director, IT Manager, Senior Network Administrator, Systems Administrator, Software Developer, and nearly every other IT role over the span of his career. Tim has worked for national, international organizations, both large and small, such as Strategic Air Command, NATO, U.S. Air Forces Europe, a 100 million private held firm, and a large regional government. Tim rounds out his experience with a Master's of Science from USC and a Bachelor of Science from University of Maryland. And I got to say that what Tim brings to the table today is his experience and expertise wearing his CISO security hat while working directly with cyber insurance, as working directly with the underwriters. And that is what really I was excited about having Tim on the panel today to kind of bring that expertise. It's a little bit of a black box as you deal with cybersecurity, especially with insurance carriers. And finally, but certainly not least, let me introduce Wynter Deagle. Wynter is a partner at Sheppard Mullin in the privacy and cybersecurity team in the firm San Diego Del Mar office. Wynter is a first-chair litigator who regularly represents clients in privacy, cybersecurity, false advertising, and unfair business practices and class actions, including breach-related litigation, as well as a complex commercial litigation matters. Clients depend on her ability to combine thoughtful legal analysis and strategy with an aggressive but practical big-picture approach to litigation. A certified information privacy professional, Wynter's experiences includes representing a wide variety of companies, particularly those in the technology, life sciences, financial services, fintech, retail, food services, and consumer project sectors. Individual and class actions brought under the CCPA, which is quite an interesting development in these last few years in the IT space. Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, COPA, Illinois Biometric Information Privacy Act, Electronic Communications Privacy Act, Fair Debt Collection Privacies Act, and a variety of privacy and cybersecurity related state and federal laws and regulations. Quite the impressive resume, I have to say. So Wynter, we're excited to have you on our discussion today. So let me kind of give a backdrop to what, really is, and we've all heard a lot of the scary cybersecurity pieces. We've seen it in the news. We've been on cybersecurity forums and webinars. But just to set a background, the average per record per capita cost of a data breach increased by 10.3% from 2020 to 2021, according to IBM. 39% of costs are incurred more than a year after a data breach occurs. In 2021, lost business opportunities represented the largest share of breach cost and an average total cost of $1.5 million. The numbers alone are pretty scary. So what happens before a breach, during a breach, and after a breach? That's what we're going to talk about today: how to protect yourself, what to do, who to call first, and what other important issues that arise now that so much of our data is kept online. So with that out of the way, want to kind of start a little bit talking about, before a cyber event happens, on the cyber insurance piece. So Tim, I want to start with you. So my assessment in my practice and what I'm seeing in my consulting piece is insurance carriers' requirements are significantly more complex than just a short while ago. It's no longer the simple checkbox form that IT departments fill out. So Tim, would you mind sharing with the group, what are you seeing from the insurance side?
You bet, Chris. Happy to be here, everyone. I will add a bit more about my role with Marsh McClennan, and that is though I am an IT professional, I have left the data center entirely. And all I do is cyber support, cyber marketing, cyber analysis on behalf of our clients. And I support our teams of the West and nationally on the National Cyber Center of Excellence. So, short answer, what am I seeing? Good enough is no longer good enough when it comes to your cybersecurity posture. Underwriting has become ever more intrusive. 18 months ago, certainly 24 months ago, might as well be 20 years ago. The evolution of cyber in the insurance space is such that almost every month there is a change, revision, update to how underwriting is performed. Certainly, as I mentioned, how intrusive it now is. And I will say, really, insurance on the cyber side is simple. Insurers want to know only two things out of all those questions in the cyber apps that you may complete. One, have you done all you can to prevent threat actors from obtaining access to your operations? And two, if they do still get in, do you have a robust security posture in place to stop them in their tracks if they get in, to track them if they move across your operational environment, and to remediate? That's it. Keep them out, resolve it if they hit in. So high level, 40,000 foot, that's what I see.
And are you seeing, Tim, where clients are unable to even renew their cyber insurance until they meet a new, stricter set of guidelines?
Yes. So in my opinion, I see a digital poverty line forming. I see where there are organizations who have a strong governance strategy from the top down, as wide as the organization may be, where they are vested in IT operational environment as a core function of the business, they tend to be successful. Where IT still lags as a silo, I see those in danger. Let's face it, IT is not a revenue generator usually. It's hard to allocate resources there. In my former DoD roles, money was no object, but I've also served in the civilian side. I understand it. Today, insurers do not want to see you come in with a floor level of best practices. They want to see you looking to reach that ceiling. They want to see what are now, at least from MMA, and in collaboration with insurers around the US and the world, we have 12 best practices that we want to see insureds, clients have in place. Those are not always easy. They're expensive in some cases, dependent upon number of staff to secure, endpoints to secure, but still, that is the evolution. A digital poverty line is forming. We want to see everyone reach the top, but that is the trend.
That's a good way to put it, Tim. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Wynter, let's maybe bring you into this piece. So from a legal standpoint, let's talk about some of the clauses that you're seeing now appearing in cyber insurance policies. Anything there that you can share?
Sure. And I say this against the backdrop of, depending on how strong your posture is, like Tim said, that's really going to dictate how much you can negotiate on the policy. So unlike some other coverages, cyber isn't on a form. So the policy is now as heavily negotiated as D&O insurance is. And so a really important point, I think, to drive home is that if you are not in a good position from where Tim is coming from, a lot of this will not matter, because you're not going to have a lot of wiggle room on what they're willing to offer you. The first thing I would say is there are different types of cyber coverage, right? There's first-party losses, there's third-party losses, there's time element coverages like business interruption and extra expense. There's theft of property coverages for data assets and cyber extortion. So the first thing I would recommend is have a really honest conversation with your broker about what your risks are and what coverages you need, because you really need to make sure that all of your risks are covered by the policy. The second I would say is you need to vet the limits of liability. Most cyber policies impose sublimits on subcoverages, such as crisis management expenses, regulatory investigations, sometimes notification costs. The sublimits are often not obvious when you read the policy and usually on first blush are inadequate. So you should scrutinize those carefully and ensure that the insurer is setting them realistically and that the policy's aggregate limit is not less than the total of all of the sublimits. I would also say retroactive coverage is important, right? Breaches may go undiscovered for some period of time before the claim is made. So you need to make sure you're asking for a retroactive date on the policy that is earlier than the policy's inception date. Now, like I said, insurers aren't going to always offer retroactive coverage, and they usually don't offer it unless you ask for it. But it is commonly available that they will cover backwards for up to a year. Some, depending on how strong your posture is, may be willing to go back farther. The exclusions, I think, is where the rubber meets the road, right? So some policies broadly exclude coverage for any liability arising from a breach of contract, but many contracts provide that you are processing data on behalf of others, and if your breach involves incorrect processing of data, the exclusion is going to apply to all of those activities. So you need to make sure that the exclusions match what you actually do. And then the last thing I would say is make sure you're reading the panel and consent provisions. Most cyber policies require that the investigators and the consultants and the attorneys that you use be drawn from a list of professionals that the provider has already approved. If you want your team to be able to help you, which is always my recommendation, people that know you, know your business, know how your IT works, you need to add their names to the list of pre-approved providers during the underwriting process. It is much easier to get them approved during underwriting than it is to try to fix it in the middle of a data breach. Oh, one other thing, defense costs. So some policies say that the insurer will pay all defense costs if the lawsuit alleges a claim that's potentially covered, and others say they're only paying costs that it unilaterally believes will be covered at the end of the day. So make sure you're reading how defense costs are going to be paid and that they align with how you expect defense costs to be paid.
So I think what I'm hearing you say, Wynter, is you really need to have a good working relationship with your broker to really walk through and understand and not try to just look at it from a strictly cost perspective, but are you addressing the risk and getting the coverage, that adequate coverage to cover all aspects? My assessment, a lot of organizations are probably underserved by their cybersecurity coverage, right? There was a great question, and it was actually part of one of my following questions. So I have heard, Wynter, let me direct this towards you, the putting a clause for acts of war is kind of like, hey, all bets are off. But Chris M asks, I read where Lloyd's of London has eliminated acts of war from their coverage. Are you seeing something similar?
So that is actually really hotly negotiated right now. And it's usually for companies that are big targets for state actors, right? They don't want an acts of war exclusion in there because many of the attacks against them would technically be considered acts of war. And remember, cyber insurance in the last 2 years, insurers lost money in both of the last 2 years. And so they are looking to recoup costs and to not have coverage. So if you have a legitimate risk of a state-sponsored action against your company, that is an exclusion you should absolutely be talking to your broker about.
Fair enough. And I know that's a deep topic we could probably pull apart and expand. But just to move on, let's shift into an incident response plan. As those in the IT field know, it's imperative every organization has a well-defined and developed incident response plan. But one that I often find missing or incomplete or not being tested sufficiently in part of my consulting practice. So let me start with you, Matt, on an incident response plan. Maybe share what are your thoughts and components that as your recommendation for an incident response plan?
Sure, Chris. What I see, so I get to work a lot as an expert witness where I work in large class actions for plaintiffs and pretty much on the other side of the table from Wynter's firm. In fact, I've been deposed by Sheppard Mullin in her very office. So what I see when we pick apart these data breaches is that initial response oftentimes kind of ripples throughout the entire issue. The attack occurs on a Friday, and the roles in the company that are responsible for making decisions are not available. They're not reachable. The help desk or the security operations center that detects the initial notification of the breach doesn't really get anything moving until Monday when the CISO's in the office and when people are reachable, and by then the data has already left the building. So the first most important thing is to have an incident response plan and make sure that all the roles are defined. Everybody knows whose job is what, and that authority has been appropriately delegated to make the calls that need to be made, and that people who are off the clock, that you've got round the clock coverage for at least the roles, right? It doesn't have to be everybody gets woken up in the middle of the night, but the incident response plan has to have a call chain that's very clear for the people that are detecting the breach, so that you don't get stuck in this, well, we did what we could do, we didn't know who to call, we didn't know what was happening, and the confusion isn't there. So a big piece of this, though, and what trips up a lot of these data breaches is not properly conferring with their counsel, with Sheppard Mullin or whoever their counsel is, about exactly how to notify, how to hire respondents. If you do it correctly, you can make my job a lot more difficult by getting a lot of that information that's uncovered by the incident responders under legal privilege, so it doesn't have to be handed over to a third party like myself for analysis. If you fail to do that, all the facts that you generate about the incident response are available, and however that's going to make you look is how it's going to make you look. The other big piece of it is you need to make sure that your insurance broker is involved, and as Wynter was talking about, that they've pre-cleared all of the vendors that are going to be involved with this. That's your MSP. It's your MSSP. It's sometimes the vendors who receive logging information, or even sometimes it's the manufacturers of your equipment, your firewalls, and the other endpoint detection response companies that you work with. Also, you want to have an agreement with an incident response provider, somebody like a CrowdStrike or a Mandiant or one of those companies that can come in and do the actual incident response forensic analysis under the guidance of your legal counsel and with your insurer's permission. That's why all this stuff has to be planned out. If you try to ad hoc this, not only does it take more time, but you are going to make rookie mistakes. So build that incident response plan. It's not technical. We're not talking about the CISO delegates this to the security operations center. It's none of those technical pieces. It's just whose job is to do what and when. You can look at it as kind of like a flow chart for incident response. It's about defining those roles, making sure that you've passed the incident response plan by your counsel and by your insurer, that they've had their feedback on it, and at the end of it all, you've tabletopped it, which is just getting everybody around the conference room table and saying, okay, IT says we have this incident, what do we do? And everybody just goes through and role plays it right there around the table so that they've done it once. And the problems that were not thought of when the plan was originally written down are feted, and you guys make sure that it flows smoothly and that you can get that immediate response, and that the people whose job it is to interrupt the what we in IT we call it the kill chain, but the sequence of events that hackers go through to get to your data. As long as they can interrupt that while it's happening, you're going to be good. And as long as they're able to operate according to an incident response plan, you guys you'll be fine. But if IT is just ad hocing it, they're going to accidentally destroy evidence. It's going to look bad in a lawsuit. They're going to do the wrong things. It's just going to take time to make decisions. That decision time is often long enough for the breach to get worse. So I see all kinds of data breaches that are just greatly exacerbated by lack of a plan for response.
Thank you, Matt. How about Tim? Anything to add to that?
You bet. I'll tell you, Matt's depiction is as good as it gets when it comes to an IR plan. I will say, I won't add anything there, but from the insurer side, IR plans have become a de facto standard. If you're seeking 5 million in limit on up, you need to have one. Under that, should maybe 1 or 2 million limit, you might be able to get away with it still. But why do insurers want to see an IR plan? It is the second aspect of what I said up front. Do you have a solution in place to remediate as fast as possible should the threat actors get in, even after you have all best practices in place to try to keep them out? They want to know that you have an idea of how long it will take you to resolve or remediate an issue, because business interruption is part of that cyber policy. They'd rather have to pay out 3 days instead of 14 if you're trying to resolve that. I'm not saying that it is a financial decision on the insurer's part. To Wynter's point, they've lost a huge sum of money simply because of the claims we hear about. But the DOJ states every day on average in the US since 2016 on their website about 4,000 ransomware events per day. So IR plans, absolutely essential. Make sure that you enlist your counsel up front so that you are operating under a privileged resolution. And then within that, to Matthew's point, you may have a vendor, MSP, service provider of some type who could come in and help you deploy that IR plan. The insurers don't provide that. They provide forensics and so forth. But as far as an IR plan goes, absolutely essential.
And I will echo also the sentiment of testing with the tabletop. We were doing a tabletop exercise where we were running through a production system was cryptoed. The engineer responsible for the sysadmin, their knee jerk was to drop that VM and delete it in favor of getting the system back up and operational. Security is like, no, we need to keep that, all of the forensics that's capable, which also goes into to make sure you have sufficient resources to do that. So shifting into another great question. So we talked a lot about an incident response plan. What are some recommendations for samples or good sources to develop an incident response plan? So Wynter, sounds like you were ready to go.
So there isn't a good template. I'm going to be honest. This actually has to reflect what your organization is going to do. Using a template that isn't tailored to how your organization works, how you classify data, what your risks are, that's almost worse than not having one at all. Because someone like Matt is going to pick that apart. It's worse to have one that you can't follow or don't follow than to just have a very simplified, it comes in on a Friday, IT calls this person assembles the team, this person gets legal involved. I would much rather see, from a legal perspective at least, a very simple and straightforward plan than one of these 30-page templates that you can find on the internet. Just being totally honest, I personally don't think that they're that useful. But Matt, Tim, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree 100%. If you download a template and you fill in the blanks with names and roles, and then you don't do it when the incident actually occurs, I'm going to do exactly what she said she's going to do. I'm going to say they didn't follow any of their plans, they didn't follow any of their policies. They're liable for everything. It's 100% their fault. You are better off with a 10-line call chain of who to call that's taped to the monitor of each one of your security operations center guys, IT professionals screen than you are with a 30-page template that is very in-depth that you don't do. And that's why the table topping is necessary. You need to strip out the elements you're not going to do because you need to make sure it's highly tailored to you. I think a Word document or that has just a straightforward flow to it and just recording what you're going to do, certainly pass it by your general counsel. They will help you with the things that you've forgotten about or didn't think about or don't know about, because they see this across hundreds of clients all the time. So you're not out there alone, but Wynter's right, there's no good template because it has to be super custom for each company.
The other thing I had, maybe two things. One, have a hard copy for the key staff, because when you don't have access to your network, you're going to want to have that. And two, to Matthew's point, make sure you've tested it, because no default template is going to solve your problem. Your tabletop will show you where you have gaps and where you need to tailor it to what you're doing.
Great question, right? And every environment's different, but I still implore it's better to have something that you've thought through and put into play, right? So shifting. So, I think we all understand that. Well, I specifically have seen a shift at the board level, much more involvement on asking the questions and not just taking simple answers. But as we all know, right, breaches in careers and organizations, certainly credibility, let alone the impact to the IT roadmap. So Tim, let me start with you. What's your advice to align executive teams and IT departments to the cost of not just cyber insurance, but putting together the energy to build out a good incident response plan?
Twofold. One, analytics from your broker, who should have all that on tap, ready to show you the value if you do not pursue certain best practices. And then secondly, tie that to a governance strategy, corporate-wide. If IT is a silo, if it is viewed as a sinkhole of cost, you are not going to be where you should be. Strive to reach that ceiling of best practices if you have top-down support. I used to say, and I will say it here, this is just my perspective. As an IT professional, I view every organization as an IT organization in all but name if you handle data, if you transfer data, if you receive data. No matter what you do, if IT is integral to your operations, do yourself, at least in part that way, not being facetious, but there's merit to it. I think that you'll come out way ahead of others in perhaps your class of business. I could name two classes of business that already are there. I talk to biotech all the time. They are awesome. They tend to have very, very strong governance strategies in place and all the best practices, and technology companies, as you might imagine. So that would be my simple advice, 40,000-foot view.
So, Chris, I would say, echoing everything Tim has said, do a risk analysis that puts a number on it. Quantify what your risk is, because look, here's what boards of directors understand. They understand cost in dollars, right? That's what executives understand. And when they can see that their expenditures on IT are far less than what their expenditures are going to be if they don't make the expenditure, that makes the decision criteria very very easy. You can include, a real risk analysis would include things like the likelihood of data breach, the scope of cost, how many millions of consumers do you have records on? Are you storing credit card information? Do you have national secrets? What is the value of your intellectual property? Those things all go to the cost of your risk. It's pretty, I don't want to say it's easy, but it's a straightforward thing to have analysts come in and help you determine and quantify that risk so that you have real numbers that you can use for real justification. At the end of the day, you could bankrupt a company trying to do every possible control in every cybersecurity framework that exists. You have to do it appropriate for the size of your company. You have to do it appropriate for the value of the information that you're storing. And it's not just the value to your own company, it's the value to the owners of that information, who that information is about, right? It's your overall liability. You need to know those numbers. And your legal counsel can help you out by letting you know what various similar companies who've been breached wound up paying in total costs, and what their insurance covered and what it didn't, and what the outcomes were for them. So just some survey of the providers that you already have can help you with that. But the big thing for convincing boards and executives to align with what those cybersecurity initiatives need to be is to show them the cost. They'll understand.
And Wynter, what about the other costs that you don't think about if an organization does have an incident?
Well, I like to think about this from a deal perspective, right? So part of my practice, I help companies that are looking to acquire other companies or that are being sold or have an investment in them. Enterprise value is tied to cyber risk. And so part of what I do is go in and check out, your past breaches, your lingering risk from that, the cybersecurity risks that you have now, and make recommendations about reduction in the value of the sale or special indemnities so that you're on the hook for all of the problems that you have on the cyber side instead of the company that bought you. And so one of the talking points that I often raise with boards and with executives is if you are looking to be in an M&A context where you're a startup or a growth company or you're looking to go public, you have to have your cyber house in order. That is an investment worth making because it affects share price, it affects enterprise value, and it is absolutely a personal risk for the board of directors.
Yeah, and I'll just piggyback off of that and say that I know of at least one case here in San Diego where a company was breached. They had just received an infusion of capital from a venture capital firm, and they had a shareholder lawsuit to defend because they had made representations about their security that turned out not to be true. So that's all absolutely a big part of the value.
So let's shift just in the interest of time. So let's move into during the breach, and this is going to be for all three of you. What should everyone really understand? I'm looking for some quick hits here. Like, what are your big takeaways or your advice if you're an organization that is actually dealing with an incident? Wynter, maybe let's start with you this time.
Privilege matters. Your lawyer needs to be retaining your vendors. They need to be directing certain aspects of the response, and you need to have a lawyer that knows what they're doing for data breach incident response. Don't hire somebody that is your contracts lawyer. You need a good lawyer that's going to protect the privilege and guide you through any regulatory investigation so that you're mitigating risk and maintaining privilege.
I'll echo that one with the difference on my side of the table. When you have privilege, I don't get a report that just explains to me everything that went wrong. And all I have to do is highlight things and footnote them in my report. When you have privilege, what I get is the literal images of your machines, and I have to make that report from scratch myself. And it complicates matters tremendously for the people that are, for plaintiffs. If you do get sued, it is far more complicated to deal with a data breach where privilege is in place.
Tim?
Yeah, I will add a bit around the application itself and the attestations you make. Best guesses, presumptions, inaccuracies will be a problem because if you suffer a cyber event. Forensics is likely to uncover whether those attestations were accurate. The policy will not respond if your attestations are inaccurate. So be certain that these are taken as seriously as possible. Don't guess. Make sure you are accurate.
And again, I would amplify, consider having a third-party security audit so that you know those attestations are accurate, because not out of any malice or incompetence, but IT guys, myself included, are notoriously optimistic about what they've done and their own work. We are not good judges of our own work. So get a security audit and have the answers to your attestations come from the audit report.
So let's talk real quick. I understand that there's guidance now these days to actually internally don't call it a breach unless your legal counsel instructs you to do so, right? Can we just touch on that topic for a second?
Breach is a legal conclusion. So whether or not you've had a security breach or a data breach is a legal conclusion, and that conclusion should be made by counsel, not anybody in the IT or anybody in the business. Call it a security incident, call it a confirmed incident, call it whatever you want to call it, but breach has legal ramifications.
So I think that can't be echoed enough, right?
Yeah, and here's the thing. The reason why this is important is all of your internal communications do go into a liability lawsuit. Your email, your chat records, you know, even the chat that you put in a Microsoft Teams side meeting could come up in discovery, and then somebody like me reads through it and says, oh, well, they clearly think it's a breach. It's obviously a breach, right? So refer to it as a data security incident for sure. One thing I'll say is, just because you've been hacked doesn't mean you've been data breached, right? Getting in is not the same thing as leaving with data. And if it is not possible to confirm, or if it's possible to disprove that data was taken, you have a far smaller problem. You know, it's like somebody broke the door of your shop, but they didn't leave with anything because they couldn't get into the safe. That's a whole different problem than, well, the entire safe is gone. So that's a big piece of this. Just because something happened doesn't mean that you have a data breach, even if the attackers are well-known data breachers and they were looking for data. So don't make any conclusions yourself. Let the forensic guys do their work and figure out what occurred.
Good.
And the IT team, right, is great at IT. That doesn't make them great forensic investigators. You really need a forensic investigation team. The other thing is, the more you use people in-house, the less chance it is that it's going to be privileged. A lot of the cases that are coming down now are saying that when you use in-house people and you treat it like a normal course of business, it's business discussions, not legal privilege discussions, and it all gets produced. So
yep.
IT, having a strong IT is incredibly important, but they cannot take the place of a forensic investigation team.
That's absolutely right. And it's another big piece of this is, no matter how smart they are. I've been on cases that have some of the best IT guys on the planet, but they don't do data breach all the time. They don't know what the tools are that are common in the industry. They don't know how to operate those tools correctly. And they are spending their time inventing instead of getting through and getting the forensic analysis done as quickly and expeditiously as possible. Just because you have a fantastic IT team does not mean they already know what to do. And time is of the essence here. You can't afford to have your really good IT guys learning while the attackers are still in your network exfiltrating data.
And I would assume also gives credibility to that this third-party expert's the one that produced these results, as well as they know when to pull the trigger on, you know, when do you get the FBI involved? When do you get local law enforcement involved? You know, we've dealt with where there was money involved, got the FBI involved right away, and it actually put a hold on the money, you know, leaving the states, right? So having that expertise of know when and who to call is very important. Tim, was there something else you wanted to add?
Purely from the insurance side, Be aware of what you buy in your policy. Unlike other lines of business, or insurance rather, cyber has no standard. No two apps are the same between insurers. No two policies are the same, even within one insurer. Whether that's first party or third party or e-crime coverages, be aware of what you buy. The breadth of coverage can be substantially different. Buying purely on price, you might end up with something awesome, full coverage. You may not. An evaluation of what those coverages are in detail, you should know before you sign and bind that policy. I can say anecdotally, at the MMA side, we work to define the broadest terms possible every time. It isn't always inexpensive. Sometimes cost is the overriding factor. You might get some limited coverages, but be aware. Policies will respond to the letter, as we know. In cyber, there is a huge variation in what will be covered.
Quick question from, just in the interest of time, Matt, sorry. There was one quick question related to ransomware payoffs. The last I heard from the FBI briefing I went to a few months ago, it's not illegal yet, but it's certainly on the table. I do know there's some legislation coming online for forcing reporting for any sort of payoffs. Quick hit, let me go around the table. Matt, we'll start with you since you were going to say something. What are your thoughts on payoffs?
From a technical perspective, don't pay. You're only about 20% to get the right key that's going to decrypt your data anyway. The smaller you are, the more likely it is you'll have full backup coverage in your technical backups to restore from ransomware. If you cannot restore from your backups everything that got encrypted in a ransomware incident, you have far more problems than just the ransomware. You should always have the capability to restore 100% of your IT operation from the backups you're already taking. You need to be testing that capability on at least an annual basis. And if you can't do it, you are going to be victim of a ransomware attack that's going to take you down. So don't pay because you shouldn't have to pay, because you're doing good backups and you can get all your data back that way.
Awesome. Tim?
Oh, yeah. If you don't have your IR plan in place, tested to include restore of thorough, you don't have to restore the entire operation. But if you have an AWS S3 instance you could just deploy to as a test, you should be testing that routinely. And you should have a thorough encrypted, MFA protected repository that you can restore from, or whatever platform you use for backups. Don't pay that ransomware. You won't have to if you have all your best practices in place.
Because we definitely see where organizations only have one main backup strategy, and if that goes offline, they're really stuck. How about you, Wynter? Any direct feedback?
There are sometimes very good reasons to pay. So ransomware now is a service, right? There are developers that sell ransomware to gangs that then use them. So you have it's a much broader group of people that are doing ransomware than it used to. The most recent trend is not only do they encrypt it, they exfiltrate it, and then they will post it publicly on a website. If they have very sensitive data of your clients, it may be worth paying. It depends on what's in there, whose data it is, who it belongs to. Is there government classified data in there? Sometimes there are reasons to pay. If you are thinking about paying, I encourage you to work with a company that negotiates with ransomware people all the time. You don't want to be emailing back and forth with the ransomware guy. There are companies that specialize in this. Right. They help figure out if they're on the OFAC list. They will tell you the likelihood that you're going to get a legitimate decryption key. They're going to tell you the likelihood of if they'll post it afterwards. Those are the companies you want to work with to make the decision on whether or not you're going to pay the ransom.
and a topic for another day. Some of those organizations, my understanding is they want a recurring payment.
Yes.
So let's move real quick into post-breach. So a data incident has occurred. Oh, Matt.
Just one follow-up thing on the during the breach. Be prepared to allow some disruption of work. I don't mean taking necessarily your public systems online, but when IT is too afraid of marketing and business operations to take systems offline, sometimes they can't stop an intrusion in process. They can't interrupt the kill chain, and it makes matters far worse. And you're likely going to wind up offline later on anyway. So just as a business decision maker, be prepared to allow IT to do what's necessary to stop a breach. Obviously, again, tabletop it, try to minimize the disruption to the business, but be prepared for business disruption if this happens. And if you've got a business that for whatever reason you truly believe has to be 24/7, 365, then you better be prepared to invest in the kinds of infrastructure that it's actually going to take to do that through a breach like this.
To your point, Matt, right, is if your data is slowly, coming out of your organization, you got to pull the plug to reduce how much information gets out, right?
That's right.
Good point to call out. So shifting, we only have a few minutes, so let's talk about post-breach real quick. Again, let's do some quick hits here. So data incident, security incident has happened. Now what? Tim, let's start with you this time.
Sure. So post-breach, what are your ongoing obligations? Know those. Are there follow-on requirements for notification, credit monitoring if you've lost consumer information? Are there contractual obligations? Will you have to pay fines and penalties? Your claim will not until your counsel says it's concluded and the forensics have determined the vector of attack and the breadth of the attack and if the solution has been remediated. So know that. It is a long process often, and the insurer is going to want to know all that happened. And again, tie it back to that application. Make sure your attestations are not guesswork. Be accurate, be knowledgeable, and be prepared for an ever deeper dive into your IT and operational environment to evaluate your security posture.
So before we go on, Tim, would you say, should most organizations reach out to their broker or directly to their carrier for when they're working with their insurance?
So when MMA distributes our policies to our clients, we advise them to print that contact sheet, hard copy. That is the contact method, but contact us concurrently.
Good.
And we will start our process internally while the insurer does as well. We want to make sure that that counsel is on top of this as a breach coach, point of contact, so everything is privileged.
Fair enough. How about you, Matt? Anything, any sage advice on post-breach?
Yeah, my biggest advice would be don't over notify. It's not good for anybody. On the plaintiff side, we don't want to wind up with class representative plaintiffs that turn out not to have had their data taken. That's just embarrassing. And on the defense side, they don't want to go through all the work to have to, counter all of that with motions. The bottom line is wait until you know what happened. And to the degree that you know what happened, only notify people who've really had actual PII taken. I mean, there's differences in what constitutes personally identifiable information or other valuable information, but just notify the smallest set of people possible. It's just going to make everybody's life easier. It's going to reduce the scope of your liability. It's going to reduce costs. It's going to reduce how much your insurance winds up having to pay out. There are legal obligations for notification. Your counsel will handle that with you, but just, don't send a blast email out to every one of your customers. Wait until you know what's been taken. That's number one. Number two, and my last big point is engage a dark web intelligence service to find out what's been posted, what's been made available online, if anything. That stuff is going to haunt you for a while, so you need to know what it is. And you certainly don't want to be surprised by it in the middle of a liability case by the other side.
Wynter?
I 100% agree with both of those comments, particularly on not notifying. I'll offer this. You need to control the narrative. Business teams sometimes go rogue, right? They've got the customers that they've worked with for a long time. They pick up the phone. They talk about things that are not approved things to talk about by counsel or by the business itself. And you get in a lot of trouble when information doesn't perfectly align. There should be talking points. There should be people that are authorized to talk about this, and everybody else should not be talking about this, because every person that talks about it, if they are not consistent with everybody else that's talked about it, you just gave a very good reason for a lawsuit to occur. And also, it undermines customer trust. If they've got a business person telling them one thing, but they're getting a notice from someone else that says something completely different, you have lost trust. And you actually may be in breach of your contract. So I would say really think about who's authorized to speak, what they're authorized to speak about.
Thank you. And last question, we'll go around real quick. What's your one takeaway you wish executive teams started doing today to reduce or manage their risk? Matt, let's start with you.
I would say quantifying the risk is the number one thing. Figure out what your liability really is and start acting to reduce that liability across the board. That's the one thing that I don't see executives doing very often, if at all, especially in small and medium-sized businesses like our environment in San Diego. Just quantify that risk and start from there. To me, that's a step one.
Thank you. Tim?
Be brilliant at the basics. Identify what you need to do, know what you need to do, and do it. There are a dozen best practices insurers want to see. Where you have a gap and something missing, identify it, know what you need to do.
Oops, sorry, Tim, we're losing you a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's all I want to say. Just know what you need to do and make sure that the top 12 best practices you should have in place are there. Identify them, know them, do them.
Thank you. Wynter?
Saying nobody understands IT is an excuse. There needs to be open and honest communication between IT and the executive team, and you actually have to be able to talk to each other honestly about the risk. Sometimes you're going to need someone like Chris, who often serves as like, the translator between the business team and the IT team. But it is no excuse to say nobody understands IT. We have to stop viewing IT as the enemy.
Thank you. So I know we're at time, so I do want to just another thank you so much for Tim, Matt, Wynter. Great. I thought you brought a lot of great expertise and insight to this table. Thank you, Kevin and Sarah, for pulling this together.
Chris, I'm gonna pipe in. Yeah, I'm going to pipe in for just a second. So I've been doing webinars since the beginning of webinars, and I don't think I've ever seen such a large amount of information conveyed in such a short amount of time. I think you guys did an incredible job. Chris, you did an incredible job getting everything across. Remember, we committed at the beginning of this that we were going to give people things that there was a takeaway value. I wholeheartedly, and I think all the attendees, if we can give a virtual clap, we'll agree that we did that. So thank you very much. We are also going to send out, I know we didn't do commercials for anyone, which we didn't want to, but we are also going to send out a recap that'll have what Chris's company does, what Matthew's companies does, what Wynter's does, and some Marsh. So we'll get that information out to everyone. Again, I know them, they're vetted, they all do a great job. So as you guys need cyber related services, this is a great place to start. And with that, I will go ahead and leave that. Let me ask my communication director if there's anything else. Sarah, was there anything else that we need to talk about before we convene?
Nope, just make sure to be checking your emails in the next 24 to 48 hours. We will be sending out this recording so that you are able to share it with your IT team and your executive team. And then I will also be putting their contact information in that email so that if you do have specific questions, you can reach out directly to Matt, Wynter, Tim, or Chris, and they should be able to help you with whatever questions you have.
Great job, everyone. Good job, Chris, on moderating as well.
Very good. Thank you, everyone.
All right, thanks, guys.